I'm going to take you through the tiebreak games from the World Chess Championship. By now, we all know what happened. However, I think there are some real points of interest in those games that are worth studying. I want to say thanks to all those that have been commenting throughout the match and watching the videos, and to all our new subscribers. Hope you enjoy the channel, and if you're not a subscriber, then please do click on the subscribe button down there. Of course, it's free to subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, then please do click on one of the PayPal buttons up there for a one-off donation, or if you want to make a regular contribution, check out the rewards on offer through patreon.com PowerPlayChess. And again, you'll see the link up there, or in the description down there. You'll find it if you want to support us. Thanks very much. So here we go. First tiebreak game, and it was an English. Carlsen with the white pieces, and Caruana didn't play d5, obviously fearing some kind of preparation in this line, and went instead for bishop b4. But this didn't faze Magnus at all. He played e4. It's interesting, we have a reverse Rossolimo actually. e4, now that's a little bit unusual. Of course, bishop g2 or knight f3, the normal moves there. e4, very interesting move. Now that, I think, took Caruana by surprise. Maybe the most reliable move here is just to take, and then both recaptures are possible. And then if you play knight takes, well, it leads to an endgame which is definitely more comfortable for white. Here, I suspect Magnus would be pretty happy with that. Two bishops, nice. But of course, black can simply play d6 and hold firm in a typical Rossolimo position, actually. Of course, white can also play b takes, which in a sense is a little bit more ambitious. But again, black can hold firm before deciding what to do. Okay, anyway, Fabiano ducked that one, and castles. Now the problem with that is that after knight e2, then you have to question what is the bishop doing on b4, because of course it doesn't really want to take on c3 when white can simply recapture here. So I think Fabiano got move ordered in this particular opening. And now here critical is d5, just giving up a pawn, but I think white can actually safely take it in this case. a6, yeah, having said that, I'm not that keen on the plan that Fabiano comes up with. I think d6 and knight d7, playing a kind of old Indian, is a best prospect. I think the problem with b5 is that actually white is just storming forward in the centre as here. If pawn takes, then knight takes, and this is very comfortable for white. There are already, well, potential to push with e5 and potentially problems on this diagonal as well. So d6, but now white just has a really pleasant position. a3, excellent move. If bishop a5, then white just starts to gain an enormous amount of space. This is a lot of fun. So Fabiano exchanged, and at least thought, well, I'm grabbing a pawn. But Magnus played this next part well. Knight a4 I like very much. It's not just looking at c5, but actually looking at b6 as well. Excuse me, I'll just have a quick slurp of tea. Difficult position for black already, I would say. But bishop e6 is a reasonable compromise. Now it's possible to play knight c5. This is a reasonable way of playing, and then white, of course, hopes to pick up this pawn, maybe just queen e2 and bishop e3. Definitely better for white, so that's certainly one way of playing. But Magnus exchanged on d8, also very attractive. Playing with the two bishops and not recovering the pawn straight away, but still a really pleasant position because that knight can't be got at, and it also defends the b pawn here. Now here I like rook d1 with the idea of putting the rook down on d6 and not bothering to recover that pawn straight away. But, well, Magnus played f3. I have to say, instinctively, I didn't like that move because it weakens the second rank. And, as we'll see later on, Fabiano did indeed gain counterplay through that. But it's a very practical move. It prevents knight g4, and yeah, sometimes the king can come to f2, sometimes rook f2. So let's see. I mean, it enabled Magnus to play these next moves pretty quickly, and well, you can't fault his judgment because, in fact, the position proved simply too complicated for Caruana, and Magnus actually very quickly got a huge advantage. I mean, I'm not sure about this particular maneuver around here. If knight b7, that sort of hold things for the moment, but f4 keeps the pressure on black. But knight b7 is best. Knight b5, definite mistake, although it feels kind of a natural move. And knight b7 looked very ugly. I mean, in speed chess, you don't somehow consider an ugly retreat like that. You instinctively play the more natural move, the more active move, I should say. So knight c5, and this is now very good for white. Obviously, pin and win. That knight can't be taken here, so rook takes. And having shattered those pawns, this is tremendous for Magnus. Things have worked out absolutely perfectly. Very interesting. Magnus had, from memory, something like a 5-minute time advantage. I think it was something like 13 minutes for Magnus against 8 for Fabiano. But around about here, Magnus invested, I think it was something like 9 minutes of his time. He sensed that this was a crucial position and was prepared to invest the time to try and find a win. His judgment in that sense was correct. This is a very important position, and if white gets it right, he's on the road to victory. But Magnus, in the end, couldn't find the win. So he took on e6, and we'll see that in a second. But rook d4 is in fact very strong. And white is threatening, well, apart from, of course, bishop e6 check first, but to play rook here as well. So king f7, obviously, to protect the pawn. And now here is the move that eluded Magnus, understandably. Of course, the move you want to play is rook d1 with a devastating pin, but then knight e5 saves the day. A beautiful defense. And this is a draw by perpetual check, a very well-known drawing mechanism. So king here and so on. But here's the trick. In this position, instead of playing rook d1 immediately, king h1, not an obvious move at all. Kind of thing that, you know, in speed chess you simply wouldn't really consider. And black is suffering here. So for example, the rook comes back, and at least black holds this. But after bishop a6, this is a clear extra pawn for white. Should be a winning position. I think certainly an easy position for white to play. So let's go back here. But instead of that, Magnus played bishop e6. I mean, this guarantees him an extra pawn, at least. It's actually possible to play knight e5 here. I was discussing this with Judith Polgar during the live broadcast, actually. I had a little stint for a moment. But this is certainly better for white, I think. The knight is driven back. Well, at least driven away from the crucial f3 square. And this does look good for white. But interesting that black can actually go for that. But king e7 is a better move from Caruana. And now Carlsen exchanged off the pieces. And in playing like this, Carlsen guaranteed himself an extra pawn in the rook and pawn endgame. Winning this is extremely difficult because of two things. Black has counterplay with the c-pawn, and crucially, white's king can't move off the back rank for the moment. That is the problem. So in spite of this lovely 4-2 pawn majority on the king side, this position should actually be a draw. Nevertheless, it is white who is pressing here. So Carlsen played rook d5. So what he's trying to do is get behind that pawn. And now he would like to perhaps move his king over, but well, he doesn't want to give up that pawn. F5 check. And the rook goes behind. So he did f5 check first in order to stop king d6. So at least Magnus has got behind that pawn, so at least that's kind of kept under control. Problem is still his king. But this is almost a kind of Zugzwang position in a way, because black doesn't really want to check the king up the board. Then white's pawn majority will start to roll forward, and that would be the end. So the rook has to move here, and in that way Magnus has managed to get his king off the back rank. Nevertheless, he's had to make a little chink in the armour of his pawn front, and now the king comes in. Now, if you've seen my video report from the match, then you'll know that this is a crunch position. Fabiano could still draw from here. Now, they were both players down to a couple of minutes each, 2 or 3 minutes each for their moves. So very hard to invest the time in a position which is actually really complex, even with just so few pawns on the board. Incredibly difficult position. Let's see how Fabiano could have drawn. Rook a2 check. So the king, obviously, no point in going to the back rank. If it comes up here, then he gets checked away again. So king h3, only move. At least it finds shelter. And now we take the pawn. So rook takes pawn, only move. Now if the king comes in straight away, then the rook can come round and check the king away. But rook a1, this is a really strong move. So first of all, if f6, then king f3 threatens rook check. The king goes back, rook a2, and well, we repeat the position. So after rook a1, that's basically the threat, king f3. So what about king g2? Well, we just check again. And king back, you can actually play king takes pawn here. And the king is just too badly placed here. So if rook takes pawn, king f3, and threatening mate, threatening a pawn, it's going to be a draw. The crunch move here is actually rook c7, and this is still incredibly close. If king takes pawn, this actually transposes to the game. We'll see what happened there in a second. But rook f1, I mean, that's very, very difficult to find in a game. I mean, all these subtleties. Really, really tricky position. But rook f1 still draws for black. Again, white's king can't support that pawn. And once this is taken, this is actually a draw. Even though black's king position is slightly odd, in fact, it's going to come back. And this will be a draw. So that is the key move. Rook a2 check. Instead, king takes pawn straight away. And I can imagine that Fabiano had simply thought rook takes pawn, check, rook a1, and he's going to draw. But here was the crucial moment, and I think to spot this idea when you have just a couple of minutes on the clock, this is class from Carlsen. Rook e7 check. Now that is a really subtle move. And the point is this, that after king takes pawn, then we take on g7, and rook a2 check, this idea from before, simply doesn't work. We're going to pick this pawn up. If the king tries to approach, then it gets checked away, and then the rook comes back to take on h5, and white is winning. So after rook g7, rook g5 is coming anyway. The king went back, rook g5, and now Carlsen is picking up that pawn on the king side, and we have two connected passed pawns, and this is a winning position because the rook goes behind the pawn. So this rook is actually very active, preventing the pawn queening and being able to hassle the king. And black's rook is actually very passive. So let's just see how Magnus did it. Now you could actually play king g4 here, but Magnus chose to play king g2. This is fine. If the pawn comes to a2, then the rook is just cornered actually. Then we can just start advancing. The pawns come here. Well, little by little you move up the board, you force the king back eventually, and that's just a win. Rook a2 check played instead, and h5, and now again if a2, then the king can come back here, and now Magnus in this case hides the king up there, otherwise there'd be a check and a queen. And this is actually a very, very simple win now. I mean, black has nothing better than to just give up this pawn. And let's just go right to the end. And here, Caruana resigned. I mean, there's really nothing to do about the advance of these pawns. So Magnus won the first game. He was better right from the start, basically. Right out of the opening, he had the advantage. And although you could quibble with some of his moves, he never let go of that advantage. Those wins that I pointed out, I mean, in particular the one involving king h1, I mean, if you spot this in a speed game, then you're kind of on another planet, basically. But it's all very practical the way he played. It's so impressive. He has such a feel for moves that are uncomfortable for his opponent. So after that first game, Fabiano faced a real uphill battle. I'll be checking out the remaining two games from the tiebreak, so watch out for those coming soon.